My name is Hans Riemer, and I'm a county council member at large. And I would like to thank the community heroes who have, in this moment of crisis, gone to their sewing machines and their 3D printers to make masks. So, I think we're waiting on Mr. Jawando, our double committee member. I'm sure he'll be here momentarily. And good one. Thank you. So we've been working, we've had a lot on our plate over the past year and a half around workforce development. There's so many different critical topics. We have a number of changes underway at WorkSource Montgomery. So I think a lot of the conversation today, we can get updated, we can discuss and think about next steps around that critical issue. My colleague, co-chair of the Joint Committee, Mr. Rice, has been, really, I want to thank him for never dropping the ball on all of this, but one component that is so vital, which is the support for folks exiting the county jail. So he'll take over at that portion of the meeting, and I know that there's some important work we need to do together as a body there. And so we'll be taking that up. The packet outlines a number of kind of bigger picture strategy issues that, we have been working on. It feels like the world changed, the world did change with COVID. So there was a lot of critical discussion. We were moving forward, and, everything has kind of turned to deal with COVID, and now we're trying to figure out how we can start to re-engage on some of those topics. So I see we're joined by Dr. Pollard, thank you, and Mr. Howie, and a number of important officials with the different groups that are here. So there's a great packet, but I thought, Mr. Co-Chair, if you'd like to make some comments, and if council members want to make some comments, and then we'll get into the packet.
So thank you very much, Chair Riemer. And let me just, I'm going to be brief. We've talked WorkSource, Montgomery, and workforce development ad nauseum for the past couple of years, and really expressed our frustration in the direction that it was headed in, the lapse of promises that were made to the council in terms of reform as well as initiatives, the challenges that we faced sheerly when it came to just getting accurate information that was truthful in some cases. And so we've come a long way. And Mr. Smith, I know, is tired of hearing us all come to him moaning about the fact of the challenges that we faced with workforce development here in the county. And I know that it got so bad that even the leader of our great institution, who already has a tremendous amount of things on her plate, even stepped up to say, look, if you need me, I'll be there for you and be willing to take this on. I mean, that's how bad the situation had gotten. And so, then to see a person like Mr. Howie come in, who's got state experience, who understands how this needs to be run, who's committed to making sure that when it comes to people who are looking to be gainfully employed, looking to make sure that they are not going to be reliant upon the system to help them, but really want to seek out opportunities of employment and make their lives better, that we give them the help necessary to do that, has just been a breath of fresh air. And so I just want to say thank you to you, sir. And thank God that we actually are starting to go in the right direction. I know that I don't want to speak for Dr. Pollard, but based on some of the conversations that she and I had, I'm sure she's appreciative of you as well. Because again, it's one thing to run an institution of higher education. It's another to still do some of this work, right? Because they still do that. But then to take it on as one of their lead responsibilities was a big thing to ask of Montgomery College. And so for them to even step up and say, yes, this is something that we would take on should be necessary. I really just want to reflect the appreciation from my perspective, and I know all of my colleagues have, for everything that's done. And then just last but not least, I really want to thank all of my colleagues, because every single one of you has just been amazing when it comes to thinking about ways in which we can continue to focus on workforce development, focus on folks that are reentering our community from being incarcerated, really focusing on what it means to ensure that through MCPS and the college, we're preparing people for jobs of the future. That really says something about who we are. Again, I keep harping on it, and I will continue to do so. It says something about our values and what we think is important here in Montgomery County. And so for that, I just want to thank each and every one of my colleagues for everything that they've done in terms of pushing us to this point. It really is great to see a great leader now. Even though your title says interim, I hope we can get rid of that at some point, Mr. Howie. But certainly look forward to working with you into the future to continue on those efforts. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It is really great to be having this conversation. Just last year during my presidency, we spent quite a bit of time looking at ways to find a path forward for WorkSource Montgomery and workforce development as a whole. One of my very first actions was actually to make sure that as a council we would address this issue in a joint committee, so education, culture, and also planning, housing, and economic development, because it is very much part and central of those policy areas. And when I reflect on the work that we did also with our economic development platform, workforce development is one of those 4 pillars. So here we are, as my colleagues were just saying, in such a strange moment. But you know what? It's interesting. Workforce development is central to these twin crises that we're facing. So not only as we talk about COVID-19 recovery, we very much are right now concerned about what will happen. All those people that were laid off, folks that now find themselves trying to figure out how to develop new skills, how to reintegrate into the workforce. So here we have now, yet another layer that we have to examine. And of course, as we are right now with a spotlight, as it should be, on racial equity and social justice, this is something that the council for so long has also been discussing when it comes to workforce development, specifically with our youth. So much, we've done so much to work in the space of positive youth development, figuring out ways to address the issues that affect many of our disengaged youth. But it always comes down to this issue of, I don't have a job, right? I don't have a job. I don't know how I'm going to provide for my family because maybe I am the one provider. So I think those 2 issues have been so central to our overall conversation of how do we develop this continuum of workforce development when we're addressing those very important issues. So all the way from basic skills, technical skills, all the way to the post-PhD, postdoctorate folks that we want to attract. It is a continuum because that's who we are here in this county. So I am pleased that we are where we are. So, so grateful for Dr. Pollard's, contributions to this process. And really looking forward under your leadership, Mr. Howie, so how we can, achieve all of these ambitious goals, but so important and so central for our recovery. So thank you both to Chairman Bryce and Reamer for scheduling this. I know it's been kind of tough now that we're reintegrating ourselves into committee work, but we're all here to roll up our sleeves and keep doing the work. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so I'm going to kick it to you, Jean. I know we've got a discussion plan. We have some information about employment. I think it's helpful for us to go through that, and then we'll hear from WorkSource Montgomery and Montgomery College in turn. And I want to just acknowledge Dr. Rye, welcome. Mr. Greenfield, welcome. Mr. Long, welcome. And we are now joined by Will Juando. Councilmember, welcome. So, Jean.
Thank you, Mr. Reamer. As you noted, the packet is chock full of information, and I definitely want to thank Mr. Howie and his team and Dr. Pollard and her team for providing much of the information that's available to the committees today. And then I'm also grateful for the Office of Legislative Oversight work on the unemployment data, which is a lot of the attachment there. As you stated, I mean, staff will be very brief. There is some background data there on unemployment due to the COVID-19 crisis. Again, that's on circles 1 through 13, but then the college in their presentation has also offered some background economic data for the committees and for the public as a whole, and that's on circles about 15 to 31. Staff will just make a couple points that are already highlighted in the packet. Unemployment rate and the number of unemployed individuals in this crisis is unprecedented. It does not even look similar to what we've seen in previous recessions. And even today, we noted the most recent data that came out noted that the total of 20.5 million individuals remain unemployed in the United States. So I think it's just helpful for the context for the committees as we talk about workforce development, not only now, but going forward, that we're looking at an unprecedented crisis and a long road ahead to respond to that in terms of training and workforce development. The other couple items that I'll note is that the CARES funding has done a lot of work to provide a foundation for those that are unemployed. It's significantly higher than most people will receive during an unemployment insurance, just from the state directly.
Sorry,
excuse me, go on.
I don't think your words are, I think you mixed up your words there. The unemployment insurance is significantly higher than wage income was previously.
Correct.
Right.
Correct. So the benefits that individuals are receiving both through unemployment insurance from the state and through the CARES funding is significantly higher than they were receiving necessarily through their own wages. So I believe that's what you're saying, Mr. Reamer.
Yes, which is amazing, right? I mean, we all celebrate the federal strategy that the Senate, the House Democratic majority and the Senate championed. This was a signature achievement. It has resulted in a huge amount of improvement for low-income communities, and it's going to also have a workforce implication for us. When those benefits expire, we're going to be experiencing that reduction. And B, we've heard of some anecdotal issues with restaurants, for example, trying to encourage people to come back, and people are not necessarily inclined to do so, whether it's because they don't feel safe yet or they wouldn't make as much money to go back. I think is, we don't really have a statistical knowledge of that, but I'm certainly hearing about that anecdotally. But so. Correct,
and I'll finalize with that point. Just because of the unprecedented nature, the federal assistance, but just in general, the data is hard to keep up with in terms of where this is all headed. I mean, we'll see different headlines about the employment improvement or the economy improving as it reopens, but then we'll get similar headlines that unemployment's still really high. The data does suggest that unemployment is significantly higher than it has been in decades, and how long it's going to take the economy to get out of that will be left up to someone with a crystal ball or someone who's better than I am. But nonetheless, I think we'll be dealing with this for a while and not having a lot of information. And so I think that's important for the committees and the council as a whole to figure out how to work with the uneven data in this and respond where it's needed as needed.
I think Federal Reserve.
I'm done with the background.
Federal Reserve has said it's going to be years. We're not going to return to our former lower unemployment rate for years. So I think we should expect, we are better off than a lot of communities in this county. We're fortunate that our unemployment, I understand, is not as bad as many other communities around the country. Nevertheless, returning to where we were could be a multi-year process if we're yeah.
So that is all in the background. Like I said, there's additional details and data that's in the packet for anyone that wants to review, or if we want to come back to that at some other time. As staff set it up, the rest of the time is really devoted for the committees to work with and talk with WorkSource Montgomery and Montgomery College, not only about an update, but also about this new normal, new economy coming out of COVID-19. Staff will just note that for WorkSource, they provided a lot of information about their transition and program update. Mr. Howe will get into that in a moment, but a lot of that information is found on circles 41 through 82. It's a great deal of information. Council staff is both impressed and excited to see where things are headed and looking forward to how this is going to continue to unfold. And then in terms of committee time, Mr. Howe will go ahead and give his presentation. Let the committees have some conversation, and then Montgomery College will also have a presentation. Dr. Long will lead the college do that with some words from Dr. Pollard, and then the committees can have a question and answer with the college in terms of how they're approaching reimagining and re-envisioning workforce development after COVID-19. And then the final one, staff have provided on pages 5 and 6 some introductory comments on the new economy, but the committees can have an open discussion with WorkSource, Montgomery, and Montgomery College just about kind of where things are headed in tandem. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Reamer, but it's time for Mr. Howie, if you're ready for that, to give his presentation.
Okay, good. I think that, an important purpose, can you hear me? Sorry, my internet connection is, okay, thanks. An important purpose for us today is to return to the WorkSource Montgomery conversation and provide some wind in the sails for the organization to move forward, or some a foundation of not in the sand. I think the organization has really been it's been in flux for some time, and it's been difficult to move forward with workforce programs. And so, as my co-chair said, we are really enthusiastic and feeling very fortunate that former Maryland Secretary of Labor Leonard Howie has been appointed as the interim CEO of WorkSource Montgomery. We're going to hear from Mr. Howie now. And I want to reiterate what the packet says, because it's really important about the structure of workforce development, how it flows from the federal government through the state and then to the county, to the highest elected official of the county, and how that authority is structured. And Mr. Howie comes to this conversation deeply aware of that, and knowing the mission of workforce programming and what we need to do to execute on our responsibilities, both to the state and the federal government. And that has been a piece that I think has been missing. And, we're just feeling like we're going to get back on track here. So, Mr. Howie, welcome and thank you. And I didn't give you a great introduction. I think everybody probably knows, but you're the former Secretary of Labor for Maryland. That program obviously oversees the workforce development programs of the state. So you know more than most people in the state of Maryland about workforce programming. And and give us a little background. Remind us when you took on the role of the interim CEO, and please share anything you'd like to share as your personal background, and then proceed with your presentation. Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Reamer, thank you very much for that introduction. That was actually a great introduction. I appreciate it very much. You've worked with me enough over the last few months to know that I'm deeply passionate about this area. And as you can imagine, if I'm given the task of presenting to the council, I'm going to prepare remarks. Now, if I cover territory that you feel you don't need to hear, feel free to say, it's okay, you can move on. Even though I did spend a lot of time on it, that's okay. No, but I really do appreciate the support that you've given. Councilmember Rice, Rondo, Friedson, Navarro, thank you so much for welcoming me into this process, understanding how much turmoil it was actually in. I'd like to just start off by just thanking Gene Smith for helping me to navigate through the hearing and session process so that I can be responsive to your questions and concerns. Getting to my background, I'll start with just one quick point, in that you could say that I picked an interesting time to join Montgomery County. My first official day in the role was March 16th, the first day of the shutdown. So you have that going on. You also have the Workforce Development Board. The new slate was in the process of being approved. So there was a transition in leadership at the very top level of this entire function. And then, of course, you have the normal anticipation and anxiety that's involved with welcoming a new organizational leader. So transitions on many different fronts, but they're transitions that were needed, and transitions that all of the work that you all put forward over the past year plus really helped set the stage for everything that we're doing now. Just real briefly, as far as background goes, most recently, before joining WorkSource Montgomery, I was with the U.S. Department of Labor. I ran the Office of Workers' Compensation Programs. I proudly say that that was the 5th largest agency within U.S. DOL, over 1,600 employees and about a $360 million operating budget. And I take great pride in saying that that's really the only DOL organization that had a customer-facing mission. So it's natural for me to really get back into an environment where the responsibility is to meet the needs of our residents. Also served the first 2 years of the current administration at DOL as a judge on the Administrative Review Board. Interesting time during those first 2 years, but just the fact that I was allowed and welcome to complete my term, I think speaks testament to the fact that, above all, I appreciate mission and to be able to accomplish what we are supposed to be doing. In my role with the state as both Secretary of Labor, Deputy Secretary of the Department of Labor, and I also spent a year as Deputy Secretary of the Department of Human Resources, which is the Department of Social Services now. So that also gives me a background into the world of public assistance that I look forward to bringing to this position as well. Previous stops of being a practicing attorney, I was an attorney advisor, Office for Civil Rights, U.S. Department of Education, with a jurisdiction, D.C., North Carolina, South Carolina, and Virginia. So
sounds familiar, Mr. Jawando.
Yes. So I definitely I enjoy the work. It's necessary work, and I do believe that my background clearly prepares me for all the challenges that lie ahead. And Councilmember Rice, I join you in welcoming the expedition of removing that tag from my name.
All right. Good.
Thank you. Getting to the a few quick acknowledgments. I do want to acknowledge the partnership and support that Ben Wu at EDC has provided, and Dr. Pollard and her entire workforce development and continuing education team. I believe we've already worked to strengthen our relationship with the objective of better serving our Montgomery County residents. So we know we have a lot of work to do, and it really started, when I think about the transition, Councilmember Reamer, you started by really indicating the fact that it does flow from the federal government down to the local level. And that's something that I, of course, understand, but I just wanted to ensure that the council understands that that's something that I actually embrace. When I have meetings, I try to tell people that the most important thing that adults sometimes do not do is to read. And if you read the things that you're supposed to read, you understand what expectations and obligations are. So all you have to do is read the federal law, but more importantly, read the county code. And it really does spell out exactly what the expectations are. When you look at WorkSource Montgomery, our role as the designated workforce organization for the county, we are the fiscal agent for all of the funds coming in, all the government funds coming in. But there are two other components of the job that don't get a lot of airtime that I think really, if not attended to, causes a lot of problems, and quite frankly, some of the problems that we've seen. This position serves as the local director of workforce activities for the county that works in cooperation with the other 11 areas around the state, as well as the State Department of Labor. Clearly, I'm very steeped in those connections, and the relationship is going quite well, because what you get from that connection are the best practices, the worst practices from other areas, but you also get insight into the resources, the grant opportunities, and the opportunity to partner with some of our neighboring jurisdictions on initiatives that we know cross boundaries. People live in one county, work in another county. That happens all the time, and so we have shared interests. And in that environment, we work collaboratively to really help to figure things out. The third part of the job is that of being the official support. Again, look to the code. The CEO of WorkSource Montgomery is also designated as the executive director of the Workforce Development Board. that means something. That means that a lot of my attention has to be directed toward making sure that that board is operational, that it has everything that it needs to execute its mission of creating the workforce-related plans and policies that will guide our county. So I take that position seriously, and that also means that the resources of WorkSource Montgomery are available and designed to support that function. Now that brings into some of the initial conflict that, I shouldn't say conflict, the challenges that I knew we had to address right away with the staff. We are a 501c3. We do operate within the space of workforce development. And there is a tendency or a desire to be like other 501c3s out there operating. However, we are the designated workforce entity for the county, and that means something different. That means a different level of expectations that we have in our role of helping to coordinate the entire county's workforce efforts and not just those of WorkSource Montgomery. So that's kind of the background that I start with in assessing my role and in looking forward to helping move forward. Now, I was asked to just briefly touch on two areas. That's the transition of WorkSource Montgomery and our services provided during this pandemic. In your packets, if you had a chance to review those, I did provide quite a bit of information on the onboarding process of our Workforce Development Board. I thought it was important to ensure that that board, being brand new, that they start with a basic understanding of what their obligations are under law from the ground up. So they got an orientation on the Code of Federal Regulations, understanding what the roles are, and the expectations in the Montgomery County Code. We actually had another orientation session where I was able to bring in the Assistant Secretary of Workforce Development and Adult Learning from Maryland Labor, as well as the Executive Director of the Governor's Workforce Development Board, to ensure that our board understood the connections that are really needed to take place. And these connections aren't really there just to have those connections at the state level. The intent for all of this is to bring back to the local area the resources and the practices that are needed to advance initiatives and just really do good on behalf of the county. I think we'll be joined a little bit later by Mark Drury. He's one of our board members, but he's more than that. He will be the chair of the Workforce Development, of the Workforce Development Board.
Okay.
Mark, we had our elections that took place. He ran unopposed. So he will be chair, and when he does log on after my remarks, I'm sure he'll want to make a few comments and chat with you for a bit. So we're happy that took place. But just that whole process of bringing the board up to speed, getting them ready so that they understand, and they do, that this is not the board of times past when they'll just meet quarterly and talk about a few things. They understand that their meeting schedule is going to have to be quite aggressive, both at the full board level as well as at the committee level, to ensure that all of the activities are conducted that we know that they need to work on. So the transition of the board is well underway, and after remarks, happy to take on any questions that you have regarding that point.
I just want to make a observation, maybe. You know, it did feel like in the previous conception of WorkSource Montgomery that the organization viewed itself as an independent nonprofit that might have been created by the county government, but wasn't necessarily totally accountable to the county government. And you had board members, I think, who believed that their primary duty was to an organization apart from the county fulfilling the mission that is handed down from the federal through the state to that organization. Mm-hmm. And so what I've learned and what I'm appreciating about your background and your comments is that this organization, primarily first, must deliver and structure itself to be accountable for that mission, and then there's room to expand and build on that, but you've got to get that foundation right, and that foundation of ownership is essential. And we've been through this very strange process of, not being able to effectuate decisions about membership and direction of the organization, even when those membership and decisions were kind of astray from the core mission. And so bringing it back home and recognizing that structure of authority, the fact that the county executive is the primary, forget the phrase, but the top elected official of the county, has the authority to make changes, does not need to defer to the board of the organization. The organization must fundamentally defer to the county executive. That seemed to have been lost for some time. So I feel like we're back on track.
I agree.
Mr. Rice, any comment you want to make?
No, I would just say, and I want to remind our colleagues to just text us if they have points that they want to make to either Chair Reamer or myself, and we'll make sure that we work you in. But just wanted to say that, no, Mr. Howie, what you've done is you've really set up where the organization should have been. And at some point, we kind of lost our way, right? And so what you're saying is getting back to what we had committed to all together, which was being that entity that stood up for ensuring that we followed the processes that we know incorporate federal government as well as some state and us here locally in terms of what it is we want to see happen. And we know that funds oftentimes are tied between multiple, and that means we don't have as much flexibility as we would like to see in some instances, but there's still ways in which we can navigate those, and we don't want those to be excuses for us to not do the work. What we want them to be is guidelines for how we operate within to still do the work, right? And so it's all about your perspective. And what you've highlighted for us is a different perspective, one that says we still need to figure out under those particular guidelines that are set, how we're going to achieve the mission of ensuring that folks who want to be employed and those who we know need to be gainfully employed or increase their ability to be employed by multiple entities have that ability to do so. And if you're leading with that, that puts us in a very different position. We were in a different position before to where WorkSource was very just focused on, look, we need to stay in our lane and that's what we're going to do. Well, that doesn't speak to the objectives that locally we as a county want to see happen, nor that we should as, regardless of whether it's a county entity, state, or federal, be looking to try and do. And so it's just, again, refreshing to hear you talk about that from that perspective. I think that that's very encouraging. So I'll turn it back over to you.
Ms. Navarro.
Thank you. I agree. I think that, for me, one of the things that kept that stood out during this whole process of all these meetings and all these discussions to see how we could find our way forward, I kept coming back to this notion that, we need to understand very clearly who we are.
That's right.
Who we are in Montgomery County, that we have to do all of the above, that when we talk about a continuum, what that means is that we have a jurisdiction which is majority of color. We have folks on the continuum in terms of economic sufficiency. We have so many assets and ways to leverage those assets to position us very nicely. When we talk about the biohealth, the life science field, et cetera, it's so exciting. Yet we also know that we have areas in the county where folks are barely making it. And so in many ways, I find that to be super intriguing and exciting, which is why I love serving on this council. But I used to get the sense that maybe there was a bit of a disconnect, right, with the previous leadership in not fully understanding and or embracing that particular continuum on all those levels. And so it really is great to hear you articulate your understanding of the structure, because obviously that's important. That's going to determine how then you can address these very ambitious goals that we have put forth in an effective fashion. So I wanted to share that because I think that's always been kind of a fundamental piece that we all need to embrace. And again, I think this crisis has just pretty much exacerbated all of it. But having you there, and I think with all of us working together with Montgomery College, we have USG, we have our amazing partners in the private sector. I mean, there's just so much to work with here in Montgomery County that I have no doubt that we'll be able to definitely see some major progress in this area.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Howie.
Okay, the last point on the transition that I'll just highlight is that the code clearly states that there are not to be any provisions in an organization's bylaws that would conflict the intent and expectations of the act. And we started that review. I was able to put back on my attorney hat, go through the bylaws, starting to mark it up. And of course, when you unified the structure, there were areas where there were actual conflicts and areas where there were perceived conflicts or potential conflicts. I've highlighted those, and since the boards are now officially separated, we can get to the work of amending and restating the organizational bylaws just to ensure that they are consistent because, and this is part of Councilmember Navarro's point of understanding, our obligation as the designated workforce entity organization requires that we do certain things. And one of those things is to ensure that there are no conflicts. If we choose not to do that, then we are essentially choosing not to be the designated workforce organization. So I do understand that, and that's something that we will work toward wrapping up rather quickly. So that's really the overview of the transition piece. I will say that, and I think Councilmember Reamer, you noted right off the bat that the staff, they've been in quite an interesting period over the past year. I will say that they have handled it with the utmost professionalism. And I think to a person, they'll tell you that one of the first messages that I started to communicate, though, was that the point of who are we, who we are. And just a simple exercise of, can anybody guess the percentage of funding, what the sources come from? And then the answer comes back over 90% federal, state, local. Then guess what? Guess who we are then? And so you start to get to understand then the shift that has to occur for us to truly embrace our mission and then to re-engage with not just the government, but with the nonprofit sector and the business sector in our role as the designated workforce entity. So that's the update on the transition. I'll just move quickly into the program update. The critical question that everybody in the workforce area, as well as just across the board, had to answer is that once you were allowed to telework, work remotely, virtually, you had to figure out, could you actually do the work that you've been doing? It was kind of a hit or miss throughout the state, quite frankly. Some had processes that were almost okay. Some had processes that were, they hadn't quite gotten around to it yet. So 0 enrollments were happening around the state. I will say that the headquarters element of our American Job Center contractor, they developed a process for use in a couple of their other contracts that we were able to adapt to our use. So we were actually one of the first jurisdictions to be able to securely enroll customers into the Maryland Workforce Exchange, into our programs. So just that first enrollment piece was the first hurdle that we were able to overcome. Now, we still have the questions to answer. How well do we do the services after that? But just the basic point of getting people enrolled into the program, we were able to accomplish that. Councilmember?
For all those other people who may not know the terminology, what does that mean to enroll in the Maryland Workforce Exchange?
There are certain eligibility requirements that potential customers must have in order to receive our services. They have to submit documentation that has to be verified of who they are, how much money they make, what their goals and aspirations are. Once those are reviewed by staff, then they are allowed to access services. And the first real step is to enroll them into the database that connects everybody, and that's the Maryland Workforce Exchange.
So this is the crucial issue of everyone who's now unemployed. Can they receive support from WorkSource Montgomery in order to be able, and state and federal programming? In order to do that, you've got to be able to get enrolled in the exchange. And you're saying you've been able to stand that up potentially more quickly than a lot of other jurisdictions.
Yeah, correct. And then even on the weekly calls that we have with the other local area directors around the state, we actually talked about that as an issue. What's everybody doing with regard to getting people enrolled? There were a couple of jurisdictions that did have a secure way to share that personal information across email without violating any confidentiality requirements. So we were one of the few who actually had a process to do that. In fact, at least that component of our contractor is other areas have contacted them to see if they could buy into that process. So we're happy with that piece, that we were able to continue the work of getting customers enrolled into our services so that we can then take on the challenges of carrying out those services in a COVID virtual environment, which is the next topic to talk about. I think that really the majority of our training partners, they figured it out of how to enroll into their programs and to conduct their training remotely. I think that we were fortunate that our primary partner, Montgomery College, is perfecting that process. So we are extremely confident in the people that we receive through our doors, that they will have a smooth handoff to the college and can take on the training that the college advertises, because they can actually execute it to a very high level. So that keeps our level of service high. That's not going to be the same across the state. There are pockets of good, there are pockets of great, there are pockets of, boy, they need work. And I think we are in the top tier of that ability to provide the services. And that's largely because of the really expert work that the college has done. So we're very grateful for that. But for the most part, we have been able to provide the services that we have always provided, albeit on a reduced level, because one, there aren't as many people going through the process. And I think, Councilmember, you mentioned just the impact of unemployment insurance and what that has on motivation. That motivation will change at some point soon, because Congress is already looking at the cliff that's coming and whether there needs to be something done to alter expectations, behaviors, or provide some additional relief once those UI funds start to dry up. But what we know, though, is that the numbers overall are down, but we know they're going to increase dramatically at some point relatively soon. We know that the class sizes are smaller because you have to do things remotely. People can't travel. And what I'm sure many of us have had to struggle with is the just getting used to communicating, to working, to learning in a virtual environment. That can be a skill in and of itself, just to navigate through the technology. And the results are probably a little uneven with that. But with that point, I think comes an opportunity. Councilmember Navarro, this comes to one of your points on when you recognize that there may be elements of the population, pockets of the population that don't have the resources, don't have the technological access, that can't communicate in the technical language that you find that manuals are drafted in, that training is conducted in. That becomes a barrier, and a barrier that has to be addressed in terms of providing the access to the technology, but also the use from the user end. But on the manager's end or the supervisor's end, they're going to need assistance too in understanding that not everybody is coming from the same place with their capabilities. So actions, activities, behaviors that you might think either not appropriate or not conducive to work in your eyes, may not be about you, may not be about the work. It just may be about how that individual actually communicates. So these are just points that as we take the lessons from COVID-19 and the lockdown and telework, or the inability to telework because your job doesn't allow you to do that, these are all considerations that need to be discussed. And I will say that I have been fortunate to participate in 2 conversations already. One that I'm sure Dr. Pollard and her team will talk about, the June 1st rebound discussion, and also the discussion that the Rockville Economic Development Group put on a few days later. These are things that came up in those groups. And in the group that I'm facilitating for the county's recovery process, I'm facilitating the Workforce Development Work Group. We are raising these issues as well, but I'm happy to do that. But I'm also excited to ensure that we're taking on this work through the lens of the guidelines that the county put forward, that we're supposed to be carrying out this work. And those guidelines are consistent with the work that you all did that culminated in that December 2nd signing of the Racial Equity and Social Justice Act. We're to look at our work through the lens of, with the guidelines of racial equity, inclusion, sustainability, and innovation. So every concept that comes up, that has to be part of the process, because if it's not, we know what the outcome is likely to be. It's likely to be absent of the things that we stated were important the whole time. So, our services, they continue to be provided, albeit at a reduced level, just because of the additional challenges in delivering in this environment. But they are moving forward. Now, the part that I think really hits home, though, that you talked on, is you put a lot of thought into what the workforce development system should look like. And I do hope, and I know that Ben Wu has mentioned this as well, that we're in a place now where we can actually execute the original intent, and we can do what needed to be done from the beginning and really see what it looks like. But with that said, you still wanted to reimagine what workforce looks like. And one of the more, I guess, uncomfortable conversations that we have on a regular basis is that Montgomery County stands alone in one key respect. Although there's 6 local areas, 6 are predominantly all government functions, 6 are a hybrid. There's a 501c3 like us, or some other type of organization with its own board or a combined board that provides the services. But we stand alone as the only one that has contracted out the Title I services, the adult and dislocated worker services. And we know that you have asked that we evaluate what is actually the best process, the best method, the best way to carry out these functions. And as I communicated to the board, our incoming board, that's high on their list. I would think that the program committee of the Workforce Development Board, that's one of the things that they're going to be charged with looking at, and to see what the appropriate mix looks like, what the appropriate structure looks like in the county, and then to come back to the executive, to the council, and talk about their observations on what the best way is. And our role as the designated workforce organization is to help them in that process and to provide whatever research and support that they need. But really, this is their call to set up the parameters to examine this issue. But we all know that this is an issue that needs to be understood and resolved so that we can move forward in the most productive way as possible. The last area that I'll mention on our programming is something that I know that's near and dear to many of your hearts, and that's the correctional services. Councilmember Rice, you're smiling already. We know that it needs help. We know that it needs work. And it's more than just a question of COVID caused a shutdown and now we can't get in there. That would be the ultimate in red herring for the issues that we have to deal with. And we do recognize that. I will say that coming into the area of correctional services, one, this is not rocket science. 2, our neighboring jurisdictions have figured it out. And 3, well, there is no 3. I just like saying 1, 2, 3. I apologize. But no, I kid. But 3, I'm not coming into this without any background. As labor secretary, I'll indicate that then Governor O'Malley had a strong focus on reducing the recidivism rate. So he directed me and the Secretary of the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services to figure it out, to do what we can to get job services behind the fence, to do what we needed to do to create those pathways for citizens that needed to re-enter our society. I am happy to see that many of the initiatives that we put forward back in the 2013, 2014 timeframe, there are elements that are still there. We know that in this process, we need something that contains the elements of a re-entry center or a welcome home center. We know we need that. We know we need a cadre of re-entry navigators to help them, because they cannot be released and expect 100% people to just show up at meetings where they need to go. It's really a hands-on process. I understand that we're not nearly structured to even come close to doing that. But what that's going to require, though, quite frankly, is your support in getting everybody around the table, albeit the virtual table, to lay it all out. We know we have challenges and issues. We have to own those issues, especially the ones that we caused and allow to carry on, and then move past that and start creating the process that we know that needs to be created. Again, we don't have to look far for examples of how to do it. We just have to have the resolve to actually get it done. And I hope you can see that I am committed to making sure that that is done. So I'll stop right there with just an overview of the programs and services that we have, and I touched on the transition. So happy to address anything else that you would like to discuss.
I'm going to pass the gavel to Mr. Rice, and here we go. Uh-oh. Are you there, Craig? I think we might
Can't hear you.
might have it appears to me his screen may be frozen. Let's give him a few moments here.
Sorry about that, guys. I got a little digital glitchy there for a moment, so I apologize. Mr. Howie, let me first start off by saying thank you. Thank you for saying what you said about how, and I want to take a step back, because it wasn't but 6 years ago that Secretary Perez and Attorney General Holder came to Clarksburg highlighting the great programmatic work that was happening inside of Clarksburg Correctional Facility. Not only that, but then Secretary Perez said that he was going to stand up 10 institutions working examples just like Clarksburg around the country, right? That was his commitment. That's where we came from. And over that course of just 6 short years, unfortunately, we've gotten away from that model that led us to not only national recognition, but also was doing well for the community. And that's where we want to get back to, right? And I know Secretary Perez very well. You worked directly with him when I was in Annapolis. So I know that you know the work that needs to be done to make this happen. And I do believe that it needs to be a shift in terms of to allow us to continue to do that same work. Let me just be very clear. Look, our jails right now are already struggling with, and I think that Council President has joined us on the call as well, who's the chair of our public safety. Our jails are tasked with doing so much, right? And we've always had presentations from them talking about mental health and their challenge with their responsibility beyond just keeping folks safe as they're incarcerated, but dealing with a number of challenges. And then to say, okay, and also we want to make sure that you can prepare them for the workforce of tomorrow is a lot to ask. It really is. And so you need dedicated staff that are going to be committed to this, not only to do it on the front end in terms of doing some of the work inside the jail to ensure that folks are accessing classes, accessing GEDs. And I know that Dr. Pollard, who we're going to hear from shortly, as soon as I shut up, has been a speaker at those graduations. I've been there and heard her messaging. I've spoken to the graduates. This is something that we care deeply about here in Montgomery County, and it's in my district. So it's one of those things where it's home also in terms of where these folks are living. And so from that perspective, we want to see them succeed, and we can do it. And it benefits all of us, right? This is something where, just as you said, it's a no-brainer in terms of not only how to do it, but why to do it. If a person who comes back and who doesn't have a connection to a job or a way to gainfully employ themselves may end up committing the same crimes they did to begin with, which was because they didn't have a job and didn't have access to funds to be able to support themselves or their families. And so it's one in which everyone in our community should care about this and really make sure that we get it right. So I think that, again, what you mentioned about the wraparound services, we've talked about this on so many levels when it comes to what it is that we do here in Montgomery County, whether it's dealing with health and human services and the like. It really is about ensuring that we have wraparound services for folks so that they can get all the support that's necessary, whether it's continued mental health triage, whether it's continued workforce development issues, whether it's continued connectivity with their families, right? Just the social services to be able to connect with children that they may have in the community and their families that they may have in the community, and how best to do that. Those are the things that all lead to better reduced rates of recidivism. And so, like you said, it's not rocket science. We just have to commit to doing it. And so I'm really happy that I know you've seen a plan that's been presented that talks specifically about what it is that we need to do in terms of creating those reentry providers. I'm happy that you highlighted it in your response, Mr. Chair. I know that I've talked to you about this as well, and really something that I think we need to push forward. And so I'd really like to ask staff to kind of galvanize this for us in terms of what a proposal would look like that would encompass your recommendations to ensure that we make that transition from where we are now. And let me be very clear, Grant Associates, I appreciate the work that they've done in terms of helping us through the transition. But just as I like to see interim CEO become CEO, I'd like for us to transition from Grant Associates and farming this out to us really being able to do something and standing up an organization that we control that's going to be committed to doing exactly what we want to see happen. So, Mr. Howie, I put that out there kind of as a maybe softball. Maybe it's got a little speed on it. I don't know. But put that out there to you to certainly hear your comments on that.
I definitely appreciate that. The one difference between state correctional programs at the county level, I think really revolves around the length of stay. When you're at the state level with the longer sentences, you actually have far more opportunities to make that contact and to have detailed programs, which is why one of the reasons why then Secretary Perez, at the state level, Secretary Perez, fought hard for the transition of adult and correctional education programs away from MSDE to dollar, what I still call one of the greatest intramural fights in political history. But it was my job as his deputy, though, to integrate that population into our workforce. And that was not easy. They literally came to our department in tears. They were educators and did not see the connection. Over time, they did. And it actually worked. But because of the length of stay at the state level, we were able to have great skills programs, a lot of things that we could do. In this environment, it's a lot closer to what you find at the juvenile facilities, that the stays are just so short. Every minute that you have is precious. So the activities behind the fence, behind the walls, have to be so structured, especially in an environment where there are lockdowns every other day, that you have to touch them in a meaningful way. In saying that, you recognize that the greatest value that you're going to have is the connection that you have once they're released. And that's the greatest opportunity that you have. So those wraparound services start once they leave the facility. And it has to start right there, because research shows that if you don't touch them in the first 3 days, good luck. You'll never see them again within your system, except for their, they'll make hopefully their appointments with their parole officer. But other than that, you might not see them. So you're right. It's incumbent upon us to create a system though that understands the majority of the meaningful contact is actually going to take place outside the walls. And so the structure has to be there. The people with the right temperament, the right background, they have to be in place to make that connection. So I fully agree and understand with where you're coming from.
Excellent. Well, I've got two of my colleagues who want to speak. Let me turn to Chair of Public Safety and President of the Council, President Katz, and then Councilmember Jawando. So, President Katz.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Howie, and thank you to the committee for allowing me to say a few words. This is an issue that is an extremely important one all the time. It's especially an important one now. And Mr. Howie, I've said privately, and I've said publicly, and I'm going to say it again publicly, Montgomery County is blessed to have you in this position anytime, but especially right now. You were the person that can carry this forward for us. We needed some help, and you are the person who is getting us there. Now, especially for the American Job Center inside the correction facility. We went from being perhaps one of the proudest about what we had to perhaps one of the most, I'll use the term embarrassing to what we had. People are not in the jail because they want to be there. People are in the jail because they've had many issues to get them there, and we don't want them there after they have served their time. It is the idea that they should be back and be productive. To the earlier points, I too have been at many graduations there and heard Dr. Pollitt and Councilmember Rice and many other speakers. And when these young people, most of them are young people, get their GED, and it's the first time that their families in years have been proud of them, and they've been proud of themselves, and they realize that the only way that they're not coming back is to get a job and to get a good job and to get themselves in a better position. And if we're not there to help them, then we have fallen dramatically. Then we have failed them dramatically. And I can tell you every time, and it's the right thing to do, everybody has the right heart on it, but even from a budget standpoint, we're saving $35,000 per person to have them no longer incarcerated. Not talking about, and the $35,000 is just to keep them incarcerated. Doesn't talk about the cost to the families and to their children, and we can go down that list. It is the right thing to do. We need to do it. We need you, are certainly the person to do it for us. I cannot say enough how we are appreciative that you will turn this around for us, and hopefully the people that use your service that once they've been incarcerated and get out will never have to have this service again in that way. So thank you very much. Thank you for allowing me to speak. And I know that we're going to get this thing done, and I certainly will be more than happy to facilitate any meetings with these groups. I mean, we have five. Councilmember Jawando is a two for today, I guess. You're on two committees. But we have 6 council members here right now, and I can tell you that I believe that every one of them wants to get this accomplished. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Council President. Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, Councilmember Rice. And I'll take all the time, since I'm on 2 committees. I'll take double time here. So no, I won't. I wanted to say, thank you. I wanted to wait till after you presented to say, to ask my question and make a couple of remarks, because I knew you were going to do this because I saw the packet, but I just really appreciate the concise nature of your remarks and how you touched on every concern, and I felt like I was in the twilight zone for like a year and a half when we would have these discussions and you would raise issues and I would present evidence, and it was just like, oh no, that's not a problem. and no, there's no issue. And then we would hear from the jail, or we would hear from residents that are seeking services, or we would hear from nonprofit, and it was just so frustrating for so long. So just thank you for acknowledging, that's the first step. We did a resolution this week acknowledging racism as a public health emergency. You have to say what it is before you can fix it. And if you don't admit that there's a problem, you can't fix it. And so I just really appreciate that you have clearly articulated and already started to work on some of the issues, the clarity with the board, them understanding their role. You've already you not only have identified the issues, you're taking steps in the midst of a crisis to address them. And that's just very heartening, because we're going to need you, as Council President said, we're going to need you big time in this rapidly changing and evolving workforce and economy. And so glad you're here. Echo all the comments of my colleagues, and thank you for identifying those issues. I won't go into the jail because I think that was talked about. I visited, that was one of the last library tours I did, visiting that library and speaking with the folks that are trying to, that were in the workforce program, that are trying to straighten things out and get on track. Some of which trying to articulate to Montgomery College and take advantage of that scholarship that's offered when they get their GED there. And so we have to get that right. But the question I wanted to ask you based on this is one that I think a lot of people, as I say, for the millions watching at home or that will watch, as they try to, as they're worried about unemployment, because one of the other sides of reopening is the angst that comes, the unemployment, there's a cliff coming, people see phased reopening, and while some people can't wait to get out, others are like, well, I still don't have my job, and what am I going to do? And how do I, get back into the workforce? And we know the economy has changed forever. I mean, the people realize now that they can get more productivity out of people. My wife works for a tech company. They're saying you don't even have to come back until next year, as far as physically in the building. And many companies are doing that. They're going to start using contractors. So the service industries, the people who needed your services the most, I don't know how quickly those jobs are going to come back. So if you could talk to me about how you're preparing. I know we don't have all the answers right now, but any insight you could give to someone who's in that situation and very concerned, and to us as council members, how you think we can approach that point when we're going to need to reopen your doors and get people services and move towards the type of new economy and retraining. How are you preparing for that eventuality? If you could, and I know it's a big question.
That's a big question. That's a big question, but it's an important question. And I guess I'll address it a couple different ways. The first one is that is exactly what the subject matter is of the revitalization discussions that we're having. We understand that this is not a WorkSource Montgomery alone challenge. The design of the initiative is to gather the input from across every sector that's impacted by COVID-19 and get the input through the four guidelines that I mentioned at the outset to ensure that we surface, that we raise all of the issues that are at play here. Now, one thing that, and I'm sure that the college's presentation will touch on this, but the retail sector, hospitality, all the service sector, they're going to lag. We know that they're going to lag. They lagged during the recession that began in 2007. And Montgomery County has a significant percentage of workers in the service sector. So that means that we're going to lag. So while the data will kind of show that those sectors, those industries that are more capable to telework, that are capable to rebound quicker will, and they have the skill set there, whether they're employees already in place or they recruit within the county or unfortunately outside of the county, like we know they do. That segment will largely be okay. They will need assistance, of course, but they'll be okay, relatively speaking. We know that the sector that's going to hurt are going to be the service sector. And we know that the percentage of employees within that service sector are disproportionately Black and brown. So we know where the pockets are going to be that we need to address. We know that those jobs that they had may or may not come back again. The presentation by the college will lend a great deal of insight into that point. But we know that there are structurally built-in delays for people to recover, and we know who they are. So it's imperative that we then start the entire upskilling process. County executive participated in our second orientation of the board about a week and a half ago. And it was great because it couldn't have been more clear what his expectations were for the board. And the understanding that part of our mission involves what I like to call the onesies and twosies of job placements. You know, give me your resume, I'll help you get a job. The value that the systemic approach is going to really have is providing the opportunities to uplift the skill set of everybody. And that's what we're going to have to focus on. The initiatives that will make people far more competitive for the positions that we know are going to come online. So if they're not there yet, we have to have the programs and connections in place. Again, the college will touch on that. But the people coming through the door, I think that's where we have our role in it, to making sure that we identify and get them situated correctly. But Councilmember, we know we know where the bubbles, where the blockages are coming. And on one hand, we have a process to go through to get the comments and thoughts up. But on the other hand, you know, we're running an organization here. We know what's happening. So we know the things that we have to start getting in place, the requests that have to be in place. And quite frankly, the a really aggressive search for the opportunities. One point that I'll leave this piece with is I kind of enjoy responding to the concern of that awful 4-letter word, WIOA. You know, it's cast about in such horrible terms sometimes. You know, I don't want to be part of the WIOA process, because in their minds, WIOA equates to American Job Center. But if you actually go through, first of all, you recognize that the Workforce Development Board was created under WIOA. So in and of itself, the process is much broader, much larger than what is called the Public Workforce or the Public Employment Center. It's much larger than that. And the roles that we have. So whether we're talking about citizens that need to re-enter the economy, dislocated workers, people that need to be upskilled, the fact that all this does reside under WIOA means that there are federal and state resources that can help with this challenge that everybody has. So just recognizing that is going to be a powerful tool that we have in identifying additional resources that we know are coming our way, or the way of the state. But then the key, though, is to ensure that we have the programming in place, the strategies in place to do that. So that's where, in this role that I have, I am going to rely on the work. Well, we all need everybody to do their jobs, right? We need that. So we need the Workforce Development Board to do its job. We need the WorkSource Montgomery staff to do its job. We need economic development to do their jobs. Everybody needs to do their job to identify where the opportunities are, collectively come up with the best approaches, taking in the input from these revitalization discussions, working with our partners like the college, and then creating the training that will upskill for those positions that might not exist yet, but we know they will be coming online. But it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard because we know who's going to lag behind.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And that's a sobering and candid reminder of what we know is coming. And I would just say two things. Please, as we're heading through that process, I know you won't be, but don't be shy about what you think we need to adjust or and I say this to Dr. Pollard and all of our partners, as far as that retraining capability, because if the investment that will be required, the retooling or reframing of what we're doing, we're going to need to be in lockstep with you to make sure you guys have what you need to do that as the plan develops. And the other thing I'll say is it's obviously it's a nationwide problem. It's not everyone's going to be dealing with this regionally as far as the service sector and who's impacted. And so to the extent that I know there were some efforts with the Greater Washington Partnership and others to try to forecast what jobs are coming back online, to the extent that we can tap into some regional and national resources that are going to be trying to grapple with this and predict the best they can what jobs will be available. I think we should do that. But I'm so glad you're in the position. Look forward to working with you and look forward to hearing from the college as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Juando. I don't have anybody else on my list, Mr. Chair. But let me just close by saying this. I certainly will ask Mr. Smith to forward folks when it comes to the local retreat program. More details. I want to thank Donna Rojas, who's been a great leader in this program at this point, for giving us some of the guidance in terms of what she's seen over the history, and reminded me that this was started back in 2006. First, when I first joined the General Assembly, by then Art Wallenstein and all the folks there. And we've had folks like her who've been invested in this since that time, who really can help us to take this and continue to bring this back to glory, right? To bring this back to the highlight that is something that's there. And with your leadership, Mr. Howie, in working with folks like that and working with our various stakeholders, which I want to make sure that we talk about as well. So we've got the American Job Centers, of course, obviously. We have the Department of Health and Human Services, parole and probation. We've got substance abuse and mental health treatment providers. We've got transitional housing leaders. All these folks are going to need to be at that table that you mentioned, Mr. Howie, and we're going to have to help to bring those folks to the table to make this come to fruition. So you really do have that welcome home center / reentry navigator program that makes sense. It's got to have all those key entities that are involved. And so I just want to say I haven't heard any objections from anyone. So I think that that's a model in which we need to embrace and move forward. Obviously, the devil's in the details. So I look to Mr. Smith to help to make sure that we can get that out to all of the colleagues that are on the call today, so that we can start exploring this and really start moving in this direction. Because here's the thing. I think if I heard correctly, we had about 100 returning citizens come back to Montgomery County from during COVID-19, from them just being released early. And then us not being prepared means that that's challenging, right? Our communities, and oftentimes communities of color, when folks aren't prepared to enter back into our community. And so just imagine you haven't had the stand up that's necessary in terms of getting you ready to get a job. You come into a place where there are no jobs. You come into a global pandemic. What are you supposed to do, right? And so it really is something where it's hard. And just to put a fine point on it, just this morning, I mean, it's just how timing works, is how God works. But it's amazing, because my office just got a call from a person who's returning from being incarcerated federally, who had reached out to my office and said, hey, I need some guidance in terms of what it is that we need to do. I'm not making this up. I mean, straight up. So this is the kind of thing that continues to happen, where we have got to make sure that we've got this, right? Because if we don't have this and we don't have control over this, all we're doing is we're setting ourselves up for tremendous problems in the future. And we don't want that. What we want to do is make sure that everybody has the ability to live out their best lives. And we can do that if we give them the support necessary. And so I really just want to thank you, Mr. Howie. I want to thank Ms. Rojas for her support. I want to thank you, Mr. Smith, for all of your background and all that you've been doing. And everyone, all of my continued partners, both in education and culture, as well as with PHED, who have been all over this and really caring about this. And of course, leading into my good friend, Dr. Pollard, who, of course, obviously cares so much that she is there all the time with those young men and women at our Clarksburg Correctional Facility. So with that, I turn it back over to you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, guys. Oh, Mr. Howie, I didn't know if you wanted to say anything else. I saw that maybe you might have something.
Just one last thing. I see that we are joined by Mark Drury. He's going to be the incoming board chair. So, Mark, if you would just like to say hello.
Keep those two hands on the wheel there, Mr. Drury.
I'm sorry. Going from one place to another, always busy, always running around. Anyway, thank you for this meeting, and I'm glad to be able to call in. And I think the key to workforce development, I think the key is to gather our resources. We have a lot of different resources in this county, and they've for so long been in different silos, and everybody's working towards different ends. I think the key is to get everybody to agree to a common goals and common outcome, and working together and communicating openly, and making sure that everybody's agenda is aligned, because it can't be about me and my institution. It can't be about me and my company. It can't be about me and my whatever. It's got to be about, how do we make people ready for the workforce? How do we prepare them for the workforce? What sort of boot camps? What sort of training? What sort of skills are needed out there? What does the future look like in this economy? How's it going to rebound? Which sectors are going to be short of skilled people, and how can we get people trained and ready to enter those jobs? So I'm looking forward to the challenge, and look forward to working with all of you.
Thank you. I wanted to ask you to turn off your video, but I couldn't, because then you would have to put your hand on the device. So thank you for joining with us. By audio would be fine. And we're really eager for you to take on your role as chair, and look forward to hearing from you as we move forward. Mr. Friedson, I think, has a question or comment.
Yeah, well, my first comment is to second the point that in the future, I hope that we just do call-ins if people are doing other things. I think video while driving is really dangerous, and look forward to working together. But I have been holding my breath here, and I think other colleagues.
I think it's a collective holding of the breath.
Yeah. So I'm still kind of flustered by that, to be honest. So, okay. So a couple things. One is we understand folks have restrictions, and let's work through those. But one, echo the comments, Mr. Howie, about how fortunate we are for you to be in this role, and obviously you've hit the ground running, and appreciate the fact that we've gotten to this place. It hasn't been the prettiest situation to get to this place. We've had some difficult conversations up to this point, but I think we're at a good place, and I think nobody likes to see how the sausage gets made, but fortunately we're at a place where it's been good. I am appreciative of the fact that we are retooling and rethinking, but we're not restarting. And there have been a lot of conversations about blowing things up and changing things, and we've kind of gone back and forth, and there were a lot of different discussions, and ultimately we landed at a good place. And I think this conversation has demonstrated that, and I am appreciative of the fact that we have had some of these tough conversations, but that we didn't move too far, because now more than ever, this organization is needed. I mean, I don't think that there has been a moment in our history in Montgomery County that we have needed an organization like this more than now. And now that we have the partnership with the college and Dr. Pollard on board, and obviously that the college's central role in workforce development has always been there, but I think it has taken itself to new heights in this last year and a half or so, as we've had a lot of these conversations, and that is needed now more than ever as well. And I think there are a lot of significant challenges that we've talked a lot about, given the COVID crisis that we faced, and the economic challenges that result, but there's also tremendous opportunity. And if ever we were set up to rethink what our economy looks like and how we are creating a talent pipeline, and what are the training and industries that we need to to set ourselves up for success. I think now is that time and that moment to do it. And I think if we do what has been discussed today and take it to an even higher level and have collaboration and coordination, and if we're working together as opposed to competing, and eliminating the silos that exist in all these different organizations and entities, I think we're really set up to do really significant things. And I have said before, I'll say again, I've never been more confident that we're going to have some real serious near-term challenges in the Montgomery County and regional and national economy, but there is no better place set up with better strategic assets than Montgomery County. And the college is a big part of that. Our industries are a big part of that. The talent that we have that we need to retain, and the talent that we have that we can attract given our strategic assets, are unrivaled anywhere on earth. And hopefully with the ingredients that we have in place, we can meet the sum as to the quality of the parts that we have in our economy and the people that we have in our economy. I think up to this point, we have not quite reached that potential, and we have room to grow, which is good. And now the challenge will be how we get there. And I look forward to working with colleagues on that, and working with you, Mr. Howie, and working with you, Dr. Pollard, and the college in order to get there. And so I appreciate this being the beginning of the conversations, not of what's been going wrong and how we fix the problems, but here's what we're doing to solve things. Here's what we're doing to move forward, and how we can all figure out our different roles specifically in how we chart that path and how we accomplish our goals, how we set those metrics and actually accomplish them.
Thank you, Andrew. I think we're all seeing here, leadership really matters, and the institution is sort of an empty vessel for the leadership of the institution, and to have Mr. Howie step into the role is bringing everybody great confidence. So hopefully, I think we have crisis resolved. It's been a year and a half of it was a word you used, Mr. Howie, that I thought was appropriate, but it's not coming back to me. But just uncertainty and turmoil. So let's get a foundation here underneath the organization. You have the support of the county council. I think everyone on the call has expressed great support to you, and so we can move forward with confidence. We do need to, I think, probably as a written follow-up. I'm a little unclear on where we are with the board process. How many seats are remaining to be filled and things like that.
They're all filled.
They're all filled? Great. Can you give us a quick update on your unemployment insurance outreach? How is that going? Do you anticipate, talk to us about what you think the next few months will be there. And it was a very humble appropriation. You only asked for $40,000, which I thought was wise to get it going. I think council members would be, want to see this as a successful initiative. So, we'll need to hear from you as to whether resources are sufficient or whether you need additional resources in this critical moment.
Well, we are, I guess, just some highlights to start. Thank you for the appropriation. It will definitely go to good use. I think the main thing is what we're learning. We know that the communities that are going to be hardest to reach aren't going to be able to be reached by some of the traditional methods. So we know that there are, and I mentioned this before, we know that there's going to have to be a boots on the ground component that will be similar to what we see in the word out to get the food distribution going in our regions. The rental assistance program, they had their challenges on getting the word out, and the fact that you really had to have that hands-on for the communities that really needed it the most. So anticipating a very strong boots on the ground with the appropriate social distancing, contact that's going to be needed to get the word out. What I'm excited about with this process, if you can actually use that word with unemployment insurance, is that as we try to help constituents, as we try to help people with their problems, we're getting stories of what some of the issues are. So those stories wind up becoming additional messages that need to be delivered, because there's only so far that you can take. Hey, there's CARES Act has money, apply for it. That goes only so far, because then you start addressing the actual issues that people are having, and you start seeing, or I anticipate start seeing, that there's some commonality there. And ultimately, this doesn't necessarily have to do with the outreach initiative itself, but if I were back in my role at the state, by this point, I would know that I really got to look at my staffing and figure out a way to assign people, assign staff to counties, or just something to address the problems, because I'm also seeing that the problems are not just about somebody being eligible or not eligible. It's actually, I can't speak to whether people are falling through the proverbial cracks, but you can only imagine the workload that's on the state staff now, and it's only natural that not every I's will be dotted and T's will be crossed in their ability to execute. So as issues pop up, I would love to be in a position to identify, hey, these are the things that we're seeing that will help them out, but also get our residents some faster resolution. So that's a part of the overall initiative that will help resolve problems. But the outreach itself is really, we learn different lessons every week on who needs to be approached and how they need to be approached and to receive the message.
Perfect. All right, just tell us what you need. Let's shift now. Thank you again. And I really want to thank the college. You've been patiently here for this conversation, and very relevant that you would be. And now you have some materials that you've prepared. And so thank you, Dr. Pollard and Mr. Greenfield and Mr. Long, Dr. Long.
Well, good afternoon to members of the council. Absolutely delighted to be here as always. Truly informative. And let me just join in the chorus and echo my support and a deep appreciation for Mr. Howie. I look forward to working with him in this role and capacity as we really think about how we work together to meet the county where it is right now. I'd also like to thank Mr. Smith, who always manages to be one of the smartest people in the room without reminding you all the time. So I want to thank you for the work that you've done in helping to prepare us for this meeting, and certainly to members of the council for your continued support and guidance. I appreciate your recognition that the college always stands ready to be of support to the agenda of the county, also recognizing that we are delighted to stay in our lane. And while our lane oftentimes meanders, depending on the needs, we stand ready to support those that we can at any given point. Our presentation today is I'm going to offer some introductory comments and speak to the forum that we held in June, and give you a few highlights from that. And then I'll be turning it over, because I happen to be one of those people who's very fortunate to work with people who are more talented and smarter than me. I asked them to come in and offer a few insights. Dr. Long, who is our Director of Planning and Policy at the college, Mr. Greenfield, who's Dean of Instruction and leads much of our work in workforce development, and then Dr. Rye, as all of you know, who's going to talk about some of the innovation. I want to amplify these themes that we've heard earlier about equity, inclusion, innovation, but meeting people where they are. So we're going to have a presentation. I'll come in and close in that particular space. Let me just start off by saying our goal is really to support the county's leadership. You all have been thoughtful and deliberate in how you've articulated what your expectations are. And as we're looking at how we move into a formal economic recovery for Montgomery County, we convened a small group of people to have a conversation to figure out how we could spur that, and more importantly, help inform a broader framework that was moving into place. We really believe a theme that you're going to hear me say over and over again is rebound, reset, and reclaim. rebound from this moment, reset the county's economy, and then reclaim our future here as it relates to how we choose to operate in Montgomery County. And I'll also say that I'm continuously grateful to lead an organization that's in this county. There's no other place I'd rather be living because of your leadership, but also because of our agility and resilience as a community. So on June 1st, we convened this group and have produced a report, which is a part of the packet for today. And that conversation resulted in a report that you saw, Rebound Montgomery. And in that, we had several different leaders come together in a very tight agenda, just a few hours, to talk about several things. We had Montgomery County Economic Development Corporation, Montgomery County Chamber of Commerce, Maryland Tech Council, WorkSource Montgomery, Universities of Shady Grove, Montgomery Moving Forward, Nonprofit Montgomery, and also a series of business leaders who are from large and small businesses, from IT, biotech, cybersecurity, and certainly construction. And the full list is in the packet that you saw here. Our deliberations began with a labor market review and the economic impact of the pandemic, which Dr. Long, who is our expert in-house, is going to talk with you about momentarily. And as the conversation unfolded, several key things became very important in that as our participants shared their fears, their insights, their concerns about the economy, and particularly the future. Our goal was not to labor in where we are right now. We are in the midst of a pandemic or in a crisis. But I think when we tend to exhibit our best self is if we realize and acknowledge that crisis to start to plan for where we want to be. And we tackle questions such as what needs to be done in order to get people back to work swiftly, what needs to be done to help position local businesses to succeed and access federal funds, because we know that will certainly be something that we could benefit from. And what are the skills gaps, and how do we develop homegrown talent? There's a reason why people come and recruit Montgomery County folks to go all across the globe, and it's because we produce good talent. We're gloriously diverse. And as a result of that, we spend a good amount of time thinking about how we invest the resources of the county wisely. Let me make a pause because I'm also a little bit giddy today. I'm not an attorney. I know there are several of you all who are in these spaces, but I will tell you, I don't know what the Supreme Court's on right now, but I'm going to be happy for them right now between the work on LGBT rights earlier this week and also DACA. I have been a little bit emotional and crying all day because I think about the students. So when we talk about economic development, when we talk about workforce development, this isn't an otherized issue. For me, it's deeply personal because it's about the folks who live in Montgomery County. So I want to thank y'all for being champions because you all set the tone and voice of this early on and encouraged the college to be active in living out our truth. So thank you all for that. I digress. Let me go back to tell you, after those strategies, what we saw in those discussions, 3 themes emerged throughout the 2-hour conversation. You've clearly heard a lot about safety and reclaiming workspaces as a result of that. And the need to access high quality and affordable and safe childcare. We know this is a significant issue. I hear this every day from my own employees, even though we are teleworking, and I'm experiencing now, although he's 13, he's going to walk past here about 5 more times to tell me he's here today. And I can only imagine if it was a 5-year-old who needs that attention, isn't able to be self-managed. So we know that clearly childcare is the backbone of a productive workforce. But we also heard very clearly, despite the growth in unemployment, we consistently hear about a skills gap. And you will hear this over and over and over again. In addition, several speakers talked about the need for critical multi-sector collaborations to do more effective what they actually called matchmaking. I thought this was very provocative, to match employees and employers to close those skill gaps and return residents to work. There are jobs, to be clear. There are jobs there, but the challenge that many of our employers describe is that they're unable to find, and there's no conduit to get folks into those jobs and the jobs that exist. The other thing that we heard a lot, if you grow small and emerging businesses, you grow the economy. So if you match employers and employees, supporting these small and emerging businesses is critical to sustaining a deeper and more sustained economic recovery. As a result of that, helping people get into the deep pool of federal grants is seen as a key step during this pandemic. So with these broad themes in mind, our report offers several recommendations, which you can see, but they're organized in three broad categories: safe return to work, addressing the skills gap, and bold new partnerships and incentives. I want to highlight a few of these and then turn it over to Dr. Kevin Long. One is that we need to first invest in developing homegrown talent pipeline, specifically fund and prioritize short-term training that allows those employed in vulnerable occupations to quickly transition to higher paying in-demand careers and close skills gaps. This is really, really important. There are jobs there, but many people need some training to help transition into those jobs. Secondly, and this is very deliberate, create a more unified and consolidated approach to matching employees with employers to meet the skills demand. Third, create incentives for businesses to hire locally and develop homegrown talent. Hire the people who are here. Fourth, encourage deeper connections between local businesses, government, and education to address short-term and long-term goals where individuals lack capacity, such as developing and deploying industry sector-specific training to upskill existing employees to advance productivity. And then last but not least, broadly, engage in and coordinate a county-wide effort to better position the county to promote, obtain, and leverage federal grants and workforce training funds to boost the economy and help end this pandemic. I encourage you to review the report in its entirety and all of the recommendations that are there in the Rebound Montgomery report. Let me turn it over now to Dr. Kevin Long, who sets a little bit of context and to amplify some of the things that we heard earlier from Mr. Howie and Mr. Smith. Dr. Long, you have to unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Pollard. Good afternoon. We'll be brief. You have the full presentation in your packet. What I'm going to do is just walk through an abbreviated version of this afternoon. There was some new data released yesterday specific to the county that I wanted to bring to your attention. That kind of sets and frames the context for our discussion. As you can see here, historically, going back to the last recession, for the DC region, the recession back in 2008, 2009 wasn't that deep. The entire region only lost around 59,000 jobs in total. And it only took 2.5 years to recover those jobs. Since the recession, the DC metropolitan region added around 300,000 new jobs. But in 1 month, 99% of those jobs were wiped out. 302,000 jobs were lost between March and April of this year. And looking at the county, and these are estimates. The official numbers are not released yet. As you know, labor market data tends to lag. They typically do state, region, and then locality last. During the recession, the county lost roughly around 16,000 jobs. And it took us 5 years to recover those 16,000 jobs. But since the recession, we actually added around 29,000 jobs. But again, in 1 month that we saw between March and April, we lost 43,000 jobs. So over 100% of the jobs we gained or added since the last recession were wiped out in 1 month. And these are just estimates. In terms of the sectors, obviously leisure and hospitality took the biggest hit. In terms of the DC region, they lost 142,000 jobs, which is about 45% of their entire workforce, just wiped out in 1 month. We saw the same thing happen in trade, transportation, and utilities. They lost around 48,000 jobs.
Kevin, did you say it's 45% of the entire leisure and hospitality workforce?
Correct.
Wow.
In terms of the county, the same thing we're looked at. About 19,000 jobs in hospitality, leisure and hospitality were gone. So again, around 40 to 45% of the entire leisure and hospitality industry sector, which includes hotels, restaurants, any of the arts and things like that. Tremendous amount of loss in just 1 month. Again, following the same pattern, trade, transportation, and utilities saw the third deepest loss. And educational and health services, which is surprisingly had the second largest number of losses. But reading through the data, you find out that a lot of health services were laying off clerical staff, were laying off front office people, individual physicians were closing their doors because they couldn't do social distancing. So they did take a hit in the middle of a pandemic, even with the demand for health services at the hospitals. So all this means is that consumer spending, not only did we lose jobs, but people started spending less money during this time. And if you take a look, and this data was just released yesterday, if you take a look at the trend there, since January of this year, there's been a 22.4% decrease in consumer spending in the county. So nearly a quarter of consumer spending is down in the county. As you can see, where the stimulus payments started, you can see these acts did have some effect. We did see some consumer spending pick up a little bit, and it's been kind of up and down. But again, still a good bit below where we were in January. In terms of the impact on small businesses have been hit the hardest by COVID. And looking at the DC metropolitan, yes.
I want to pause you there.
Please.
The lack of consumer spending, it's not necessarily a one-to-one that's the impact of people losing jobs. It's that nobody can go out. They can't spend money if they want to, unless
exactly.
So that's really the broader problem right now, is that people finding it hard to spend money, I suppose.
Yes. With places
so we lagged Maryland. So I think that's an interesting phenomenon. So we all, in theory, should have been in a similar situation. If I look at the data, what I find a little bit confounding is that you look at Montgomery County in comparison to the rest of the state. That, to me, would be an opportunity for some deeper research. I don't know the answer to it, but it's interesting to me.
Could that be more aggressive distancing?
It could be.
Could be.
And the fact that the counties has tended to lag behind the state in terms of phased reopenings. So all along, and plus we've had more cases, there are a lot of factors come into play here. In terms of the small business impact, you can see within the DC metropolitan region, at the very bottom of this epidemic, small businesses lost 73% of their workforce, of their hourly workforce. So it's a 73% reduction in hourly employees at small businesses at the very height of this pandemic. Now we're slowly starting to crawl out of this. Businesses are reopening, and so we are hiring people back. But again, as you'll see, small businesses lost about 20. They're down about 30% in revenue over January, since January. As you can see again, April 15th, when the stimulus payment started, you see where the revenue ticked back up again. They were able to reinvest, maybe reopen, maybe hire people back. But again, it started to flatten out again. So as long as we're still in phased reopenings, a lot of businesses aren't able to reopen. They may not be able to hire. People may not want to come back to work. So the impact on small businesses is really tremendous. Also, in terms of the number of small businesses actually open, about a quarter of our, we've got 25% reduction in small businesses actually open since January. So nearly a quarter of our small businesses, aren't open yet. So, or at least 25% or less open.
Does a restaurant providing takeout count as open or closed?
It counts as open. It counts as if having any financial transaction activity.
Wow. So 25% are just having zero transactions.
Yeah, exactly. So, but the good news is the county is much less vulnerable than all the other most of the other counties in the state due to our industry mix. When you look at this nationally, those localities that are heavily dependent on tourism dollars, other types of leisure activities are taking the biggest and the most sustained hit. Now, the national average is 100. So as you can see here, Montgomery, the college is, the county is actually has an 84.62 vulnerability index rating. So it bodes well for our recovery that even though we got hit, we're not as vulnerable as a lot of other areas were in terms of the impact of COVID. And again, that's because of our industry mix. We do have a good-sized leisure and hospitality sector, but again, it's dwarfed by our education and healthcare services, our professional business services, which is where our biotech, biomanufacturing comes in, and by government. So, our industry makeup has been able to cushion the blow quite a bit in terms of the impact. In terms of unemployment, good news on the horizon. Unemployment claims, while still much higher than they were back in March, we hit a peak in mid-March and we hit a peak at the beginning of May again. We're back down again. So we're starting to see unemployment claims, or initial unemployment claims, start to drop off a little bit. We're nowhere near where we were before, and it's still way too high. In terms of the rate, the claims per 100 people, again, the county at its peak had about 3.5 out of every 100 people had applied for unemployment in the county. We're back down to about 1.125 people per 100 for now on unemployment in the county. So we're seeing massive improvement in terms of unemployment claims. But again, still much higher than it was before the pandemic, when our rate was about 0.03 people per 100 for unemployed. We were close to full employment in the county. So where the rubber really meets the road here is in terms of what this recovery is going to look like by specific workers and breaking out here by educational attainment. We saw back during the last recession, high school or less in the county took the biggest hit. They lost 17,000 jobs here in the county that required a high school diploma or less. So these are low-income, low-skill employees. And over the course since the recession, we've only recovered 29% of the jobs lost for these. So we lost a lot of low-income, low-entry-level, low-skill positions that just never came back. Post-secondary associates or middle skills jobs lost about 4,000 jobs at the height of the recession. Recovered about 65% of them. So middle skills jobs, not as bad, but still, a lot of attention needs to be paid to it. You take a look at bachelor's degree and higher, those jobs, the high skilled jobs. We actually added jobs during the recession that required a bachelor's degree or higher. And so the bachelor's degree jobs have been chugging along, and that's a reflective of who we are as a county in terms of our demographics. We have an extraordinarily high educational attainment rate here in the county, and we have a lot of high-end, high-skilled jobs. So those jobs and those positions, those people will probably fare a lot better than our middle skills people, and our middle skills people will fare a whole lot better than our high school folks who have a high school diploma or less. Speaking of low-income workers, if you take a look at the change in employment among low-income workers, since January, low-income workers have seen a 44.3% decrease in unemployment. So we have 44.3% less low-income workers actually employed now than we did in January of 2020. And taking a look at their earnings, they're actually earning 41.5% less than they were in January. So even though we hear anecdotally about the CARES and the extra unemployment, people making more than they were before, when you take a look at the larger picture in terms of change in earnings, our low-income workers are taking an enormous hit. They are in a much worse position now than they were in January. Some other good news is we're starting to see job postings come back up again. We're still about, in the region, we're still about 11.5% down from where we were in January, but we're starting to climb back up as industries start to open up, businesses start to open, we enter new phased openings, and people start to hire again. So what we're seeing in terms of these job postings is at the college, we keep a close eye on what skills are in demand, because that helps us tweak our curriculum and develop brand new training programs for industry and for workers. As you see, a lot of the power skills that are emerging out of this, punctuality, active listening, patience, consumer engagement, team orientation. There are things that are more difficult to teach, but you can weave in through specific kinds of assignments. Hard skills. Hard skills that we're seeing are predominantly leaning toward elder care and healthcare, but you're also seeing some safety training as employers open up. They're going to need advice. They need to know how to open safely. They need to know how to make things safe. So they're looking for people with safety training experience or safety training skills. In terms of technical skills, no surprise there, Java, Hibernate Java is always up there at the top. Apache Subversion, web pages, security policies. As we move more toward remote work, we're seeing a lot more emphasis on security policies. So as people start to, businesses reopen, During the height of the pandemic, when everyone was closed, we saw a surprising increase in job postings for investigative services. That one's in your packet. Come to find out, those investigative services were mostly cybersecurity related. As more companies shut down and pushed people remote, they were no longer monitoring their own networks. So there needed to have somebody come in and monitor for their employees to make sure that they were still secure in their transactions online. And our certifications, certified nursing assistant, our licensed practical nurse, again, very high in demand. CDL. CDL is one of those certifications that we can never hire enough CDL holders in the county. And then our CompTIA Security Plus, which is one of our cybersecurity trainings, is also an in-demand skill that kind of dovetails with the move towards cybersecurity. So what does all this mean in terms of where do we go from here? As you see from the data today, and it's in your package, there are a huge number of people who are either unemployed or underemployed. Now, these aren't just people that don't bring anything with them. They have skills. A lot of them have a lot of transferable skills. And so what they really need right now is a lifeboat. And it's either a lifeboat job or a lifeboat training. The lifeboat job, we're working with employers and trying to emphasize that, look at skills needed, not necessarily credentials. We are credential heavy. We worship the credential here in this county, but not all jobs require a bachelor's degree, as long as one has a set of skills. So look at the skills that people are bringing with them. What can they learn on the job? And particularly for those jobs that fill an ongoing demand. Now, some of these jobs may initially pay less, but that's okay. It's supposed to be a lifeboat job. Lifeboat training, on the other hand, is we want these people to come to Montgomery College or come to a training program that we're offering, a short-term credential, that will give them new skills. We know they're coming in with certain skills already, so it's incumbent upon us to take a look at how we manage our credit for prior learning. What can we give them that will accelerate their progress through these programs? What can we give them that can supplement their existing skills? And then looking at the labor market and what jobs are demanding in terms of skill level, what skills can we offer that are in demand that we know will help this person get a job? So once they transition from this lifeboat with these new portable skills, hopefully it's a transition to a higher paying in-demand career. Now, to see how this might play out, you take a look at the sector, the leisure and hospitality sector that were hit hardest. Some of the occupations were hit the hardest: retail sales, hotel, motel desk clerks, supervisors at food restaurants. These people all bring skills with them. They bring customer service. They bring problem-solving skills. Many of them bring e-commerce skills with them. So they carry these skills on board, and a good lifeboat job for them would be a computer user support specialist, because a computer user support specialist requires customer service, problem solving, familiarity with technology. It's a pretty good entry-level salary, about $34,000 here in the county. And in the last 30 days, there were 426 job postings for computer user support specialists. So if a person has those skills and can be hired, great, but they may not have those skills. So it becomes the lifeboat training. How can we leverage those skills to give them something that they can leave with that will go to something better? So we want to train them to be a computer user support specialist. We can teach them CompTIA Security Plus. We can teach them web development. We can teach them cloud-based tools and cloud-based management. So they roll this into the lifeboat job, and then when they leave, they take the skills they brought with them plus new skills that they've learned: operating systems, project management, system administration, and they take those to that next step job: computer network support specialist, computer systems analyst, or web developers. So there's a very clear pathway that we can lay out for that retail salesperson or that McDonald's restaurant employee who is laid off. They have skills, short-term credential training, a short-term lifeboat job. They learn more skills, and it gets them on the path to a brand new career. And that's all I have, and I will answer any questions or turn it over to Mr. Greenfield.
That's fantastic, Kevin. That was really helpful. Thank you. Let's keep moving, Mr. Greenfield, and then we'll come back for questions.
Hello, thanks everyone for your time. And as a workforce board member, I'd like to echo the note of appreciation for Mr. Howie's leadership. I've been to the first couple of meetings, and he's really systematically and thoroughly orienting the board to our responsibilities and also to the opportunities to work together and to collaborate might play out. So I'd like to briefly hint at some of the ways MC might contribute. Kevin's already done some of it to this new collaborative, tightly collaborative talent pipeline system. And especially to get the hardest hit back to work, we saw an unprecedented unemployment, 43% drop in jobs for those who are low skill, low income. And we have a few ways that we think we can work together with WorkSource Montgomery to make that happen. Dr. Long just pointed out that post-secondary skills and credentials of some type will be critical in getting people back to work quickly and into good economic security jobs. And by economic security, Montgomery County, as you know, has a $22 an hour economic security wage. And so those are the kinds of jobs we aim at when we're trying to train people with post-secondary skills to get them onto a career pathway that will get them to an economic security wage. A certificate, a certification, a degree, some kind of additional skill that helps those hardest hit to get back into good jobs. And not just any post-secondary credentials. Some skills, as Dr. Long has pointed out, have more currency and impact than others. Post-secondary credentials in resilient industries, industries that weathered and will continue to thrive post-COVID, are most impactful for our residents and can lead to good jobs with career pathway opportunities. You have in your packet an Montgomery College key employment sector grid. And you'll see in that grid that we are very active in programming in those key industry sectors: IT, cybersecurity, health sciences, biotech, management, which is a cross-sector skill, construction and HVAC, and transportation. So we're actively programming, and we're doing it in three ways that I'd really like you to hear today. One, we have students who are on degree pathways who will hit the labor market in 3 to 5 years. They'll come with associate's degrees and bachelor's degrees, and they'll be ready to enter into good jobs. Secondly, it's the students who need short-term programs in key sectors and need to enter the job market almost immediately. So we have our workforce development programs also in those same sectors that provide courses that run from about 3 to 6 months. And after 3 to 6 months, students can get a credential or a certificate and get right back to work. And lastly, our students are the employees of companies who the college trains. Montgomery College trains about 50 companies a year, upskilling the employees of public and private sector organizations and having a more direct impact on economic development. One example is EMIS, which, as you know, is an expanding clinical trial company that has done management training for 2 years with Montgomery College because they were promoting their good technical people into management jobs, but needed to add management skills. So in those ways, we are having a direct impact on companies and company growth. And then there's some companies, as Kevin pointed out, who are indicating that they want to, maybe in hospitality or retail, they want to retrain and hold on to employees who would otherwise face layoffs. So we're working in a number of ways to address the pandemic and get people back to work and get them upskilled and trained. One of the challenges we face is how to scale these programs. We offer a program. Workforce development serves 24,000 students a year. Montgomery College as a whole, 55,000 students, but many, many, many more are unemployed. And so how do we scale these programs in this talent pipeline system so that we're serving more people, especially during a pandemic when unemployment has soared the way it has? So one of the important ways that we can scale is through partnership, as many have pointed out. Montgomery College has many partnerships, but a critical one in workforce is with WorkSource Montgomery because, as others have observed, WorkSource Montgomery operates the America's Job Centers that recent data shows that they see about 15,000 people a year, unemployed and underemployed, who walk into the America's Job Center. So they're serving thousands of unemployed and underemployed, and many of them need a post-secondary credential in order to move ahead. And that's our value proposition at Montgomery College. We can provide that post-secondary credential that gets somebody a lifeboat skill and gets them back into a job. And so WorkSource serves those thousands of people, and then for hundreds, they're able to provide WIOA funding and actually fund low-income individuals' training, because training does cost. And so accessibility becomes an issue. And so with WorkSource serving and funding students into Montgomery College credential programs, we're able to get people back to work and they're able to access these programs. So a tight collaboration between WorkSource, Montgomery, and Montgomery College creates this talent pipeline system and can move thousands from unemployment to jobs. I do want to add, lastly, that we've already been having discussions about how we can make this happen. So Mr. Howie and I have been planning a cohort training model. WorkSource Montgomery got, in addition to its federal funds, it got emergency pandemic employment funds from the U.S. Department of Labor that have come through the state. So there's an additional pot of money there to serve individuals and get them into education and training. So that cohort model, what we proposed to the state was that we'd serve 1,000 students who would come to Montgomery College and get training in key sectors and move back into the workforce. And that cohort training model trains not just individuals who've indicated that they want to go into health sciences or want to go into IT, but they get entire classes. And Montgomery College provides a really, really modest bulk rate. So we're able to move 1,000 people into jobs. We're also making efforts to develop a Pathways Institute so that WorkSource Montgomery, Montgomery College, the nonprofits in our community, and government are coming out of a common career pathway framework and understanding so that we can get people back to work. One of the key participants in that career pathway will be the employer community, because in every pathway there is a gateway occupation that's accessible by entry-level individuals. And that gateway provides the way onto the pathway and higher jobs. We need employers to help us identify what those gateway occupations are, what those knowledge, skills, and abilities are, so that we can build programs that get people into the gateway and on up the pathway into good jobs. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Roy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. So I just wanted to refocus a little bit. What are we really attempting to do here? A challenge. Nationally, 39 million people have lost jobs. And if we look at Dr. Long's data, about 40,000 or a little bit over in the county. Our short-term need is certainly to give them lifeboat training so that they can get skills in the areas where we have jobs. And those skills should provide micro-credentials so that they can be on a path to a certificate or degree. So this is something that we have to do quite quickly. The other is that in the pandemic, new economy is coming up. And I think we have some opportunity as a county also to take advantage of the new opportunities that are coming within life sciences, within manufacturing of life sciences, hospital-related manufacturing. A lot of things are quickly starting moving out of China and other places too because of supply chain issues. A lot of vaccine developments. We are research capital of the world, but imagine if manufacturing starts happening here as well. So what can we do to accelerate that process? Because in the end, we have to expand our economy. We have to bring more jobs. And what can we do to be more competitive globally, but also nationally and within more immediate region as well. So some of the things, how Montgomery College works in these areas. Number one, certainly, as you can see, we pay very close attention to data. So when we started, 3 years ago, we started looking at data in cloud computing. Jobs started coming in hundreds and thousands numbers, job postings. So we worked with Amazon. We created a short-term certificate, AWS, in non-credit first, working directly with Amazon. Then we created a credit 2-year degree in cloud computing. Then we articulated our degree with George Mason University in Virginia because they were the only university offering undergraduate degree. And I believe we were the first or second institution to do articulation with them. When we start looking at app development and Swift coding jobs started coming up, we worked with Apple to create Swift coding, and Councilmember Rice was very heavily involved in that. Is still very, very heavily involved. And we are doing Montgomery Can Code initiative. Clinical trial project management. This is a certificate program we started 10 years ago. If somebody has a clinical trial project management skills today, you can imagine how many that person will have. And again, that happened with, we work together with clinical trial industry, especially one of the leading companies in our area, Amarex, which is a CRO. Biomanufacturing, biotechnology program, we just finished review of our program with the AstraZeneca and also GlaxoSmithKline, making sure that our program in biomanufacturing and biotechnology really aligns with the new thing that they are doing, especially in COVID-19 and other areas. A non-credit work, a lot of non-credit work happens at Montgomery College in life sciences, biotechnology area. We have an entity, BioTrack, that works on short-term training, contract training, on-site training. Let me give you an example. AstraZeneca needed a high-end training for their employees. And they needed to train on equipment that's, there are only few pieces in the world. So we found that equipment in California, we transported it here for a short period of time, provided the training, and sent the equipment back. Imagine that model, because it's, first of all, if there are only few pieces of equipment in the world, then it's a very cutting edge skill that companies need in their employees. So we have a model to create the training, get the equipment, and deliver the training in a very affordable manner. Then what do we do to create homegrown workforce among our young people? So PHED program. From next year, about 60 students will graduate with 2-year degrees in high school in networking. You see the networking jobs that are coming. It's only with one high school. Early college program, very strong program, again in health sciences, cybersecurity, engineering, and other areas. From next year, we are adding early college in cloud computing. Most likely very first college to do that. And we are starting one in biotechnology as well. So this is the model, this is how we create programs, but how do we make it affordable? That's important. So we were very lucky in getting about $25 million of competitive federal grant to create cybersecurity IT related training at almost very low cost, almost free actually, I'll say that. But we have not been as fortunate over the last 4 years because there's a different federal government. And
you don't have a former Montgomery County Council member as the Secretary of Labor.
I think that is more importantly, the philosophy is different. I think that, you need to have certain resources to compete in the new environment. So, if you look at the federal grant structure, a lot of grants will come for workforce development in the next few years. And as a region, we have to make sure that some of that funding or a lot of that funding comes to our region. So this is where, there may be a gap where we may need to create some resources and a structure to make sure that we are competitive in getting workforce development grant. That's number one. Number two, right now, Congress is sending a lot of money to NIH for a lot of companies that are working in COVID-related work. $1 billion to AstraZeneca, $600-700 million to Emergent Biosciences. They're all our company, Novavax and others. But our smaller companies, and we have about 200 or 300 smaller life sciences companies, they do not have resources to compete or even understand the paperwork that's involved in getting NIH money. Imagine if a region creates a support structure for smaller companies to access this funding that's coming from federal government. So these smaller companies will hire more people. They will grow. Novavax, Human Genome Sciences, MedImmune, they were all smaller companies. And they began with some angel investment, but a lot of federal, including the county dollars, right? So I think that's an area where we can focus a little bit more and make sure that the federal money that's going either directly for the companies or for workforce development, if we can get our fair share that by creating a small structure within the county to do that, I think that would go a long way.
Very intriguing. Could you please send us a memo as a follow-up to kind of lay this out for us?
Very happy to do that.
So, Councilmember Hans Reamer, let me just end, because with that, we always stand ready at the college to be and support and champion the work of the council and the county executive. We urge you to be bold in our three key areas, and that's stand-up county efforts to seek federal grants, as was just outlined by Dr. Rai. We think there's an opportunity to really create trickle-down economics that works well. Secondly, I think make real on this promise around the ecosystem of workforce development. We know that we need to employ our homegrown talent. So that idea of really continuing to bolster the work of Mr. Howie and the collaborations that they have, I think is going to be essential. Calling it out as you've done here today and holding us accountable, I think is particularly important. And last but not least, invest in the promise of Montgomery County. I think it is a great opportunity ahead of us to really be bold and to scale up and broaden some type of Montgomery County promise around this work. You work in this, you are educated in this community, you work in this community. There are some obligations that we want to make in terms of helping you be a contributing and lifelong member of this community. So I think there are opportunities in those spaces. And again, we stand ready. We encourage us to be bold and be audacious to the extent we can. And with that, we stand ready to respond to any questions that you may have of this team.
Thank you, Dr. Pollard. My co-chair will join me in saying that hearing from WorkSource and the college together on the same day, it gives me a lot of confidence and makes me feel like, you're a dynamic duo. We're reset there, and that's fantastic. As we were prepping for this meeting, we were thinking about the moment, and Craig said, "Hey, really, the conversation we were having about tech talent pipelines is more important than ever, because those are the jobs that are now being, that kind of job creation is being accelerated through this transformation." And he was prescient, because the numbers that you've presented to us today, I think, are laying that out very clearly. And what we were working towards was trying to devise some new programs, some enhanced strategies around tech talent pipeline and just growing that sector. And I think the message from today's discussion about workforce development is keep working on that. Don't set that aside because of the moment. Actually, it's more urgent than ever. We need to find the resources for it, and we need to get behind that, because that's the only opportunity for growth right now, in the employment sector. So we're going to have to just pick up where we left off, but with more urgency.
Yes.
Around these kinds of initiatives. Craig.
Yeah, so let me just say, look, one of the parts is to get a job. The other part is keeping a job and being relevant in the job. Even having a mastery of technology is going to be important in retaining jobs right now for a lot of folks, right? As we go to and shift towards telework and a lot of things that are very different in terms of being able to create presentations, you better know how to create a PowerPoint presentation nowadays, because that's the only way. You're not going to be able to show a person a piece of paper and put it up there, right? So you've got to be proficient in knowing how to create Excel spreadsheets and all those kinds of things. So even the basics that we kind of gave up and said, well, that's for somebody else, and I don't have to do that. I can still do things my way. Well, that's not happening any longer, right? And a lot of folks are shifting to this way. And I will just say something very quickly, because I know the hour's late, about hospitality, because I lived it, right? I was in that industry for 8 years before coming into elected office. And so I can tell you firsthand, I know of people from the highest levels in Marriott to the lowest levels in Marriott in terms of entry-level positions who have all lost their jobs. I'm not even talking about just temporarily laid off. I'm talking about their job is now gone. And this just happened recently, right? In the past couple of weeks. And so from that perspective, I mean, this industry, just like you said, Kevin, is going to be, dropping folks left and right. I mean, and it's not going to recover anytime soon. I mean, folks, this is going to be slow. And you heard that from Mr. Howie also. This is going to be an industry that takes a long time to recover. I remember 2008 because I had just gotten into the Maryland General Assembly at the time and knew a lot of folks who lost their jobs then, a lot of places who, streamlined their stuff then and shifted to a lot of automation. And that's the other thing, right? So again, remember a few years ago when we were having this conversation in this very same context with EC and then it was education and PHED, and we were talking about McDonald's and we were talking about McDonald's automation. Well, guess what? With COVID, it now made it so that you can't go in, so you have to do mobile orders or go through the drive-through. And so everybody's shifting towards mobile orders, which means you've got to have more people standing up that platform, right? All the coding and everything that's associated with that and with standing up that platform and what it means and how it relates. And I promise you that inside that McDonald's, there are test kitchens right now that are going on how to automate when it comes to the actual cooking of the products themselves, right? It's already partially automated because all you have to do, and you guys know because that was one of my first jobs, and even back then, all you had to do is push down the little sprayer thing, and it would stay, and it would automatically pop up at the same time. It'd do a beep and alarm, and all you have to do is just scrape it up and put it on the thing. So I mean, now it's on a conveyor belt, and so I mean, it's like these are the kinds of things where it's like, okay, guys, we need to make sure that we're continuing to retool our communities. And so that's going to happen through the great innovation and work and processes and thought that goes into what's happening at Montgomery College and WorkSource. I mean, this is really making sure, like I said, it's not just about getting a job, it's about folks retaining jobs too. And that's going to be incredibly important as we prepare our workforce for the future. And we know if we're being true to what we care about, which is understanding that those in our community that are marginalized, oftentimes our lower income Black and brown folks who are in these service industries, we have got to get to them and make sure that we give them the skills necessary for the jobs of the future. And so I just really want to say thank you to you, Mr. Chair, and to everybody who's on this for committing to that, because that says a lot. Again, morality, moral values, who we are.
Thank you. Okay, any comments from committee members? I think this is a very useful framing for us to proceed forward. I think as a council member, I could say when I've got to reserve some of my time in my head to be able to think about these initiatives and help figure out how to move forward. It's not easy with everything that's going on right now. So we are relying upon our partners to continue forward. We hear that this might be a time of resurgent enrollment at the college. Perhaps we'll see, and yet we're in an environment of anticipated budget cuts. So we're going to be grappling with some really difficult, conversations in the next coming months. So we will return to this issue. We've made some big progress today, I think, setting the foundation for Workforce Montgomery, getting a sense of the big picture, and we're going to return with some new initiatives and ways to move the ball forward in the coming months. And I think without further ado, we can adjourn. Thank you to the college. It was really very helpful. Thank you to Worksession Montgomery. All right, everyone be safe, stay distant, wear a mask, take care, don't drive and Zoom. And
don't do that.
Yeah, can I move to make a rule that that's never allowed ever again?
Too soon, Andrew, too soon.
All right.
Just glad I wasn't the chairman when that happened.
Yeah, it could have been during a library conversation, and then could have been in trouble. I just want to say I'm glad to have been able to join a committee session where Councilmember Jawanda was on his favorite committee, because when we were at PHED committees,
this is definitely my favorite committee.
Yeah.
We'll remember that.
That's right.
Remember
I hear it
that.
all the time, Andrew, so I'm good.
Yeah.
I know. I feel left out, so I'm glad I got to be part of the team today.
Thank you, Dr. Pollard, Dr. Long,
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
All
Thank
right.
you. Bye-bye.
Keep up the good
Take
work.
care.
Stay safe, everybody.
Take care.
All right.
Woodmont Avenue between Elm Street and Bethesda Avenue, Northfoot Avenue between St. Elmo Avenue and Cordell Avenue,